that were hold the weights. And usually it takes some playing with it a little bit to get the figure to be in the position that you want it. I settled in Kentucky, even though the family moved on. My dad was still in the Air Force. I lived with an uncle and finished high school here.
When we were in high school, he took art, and the teacher basically said, "There's nothing I can teach you. I can't teach you anything. You just, as long as you go over there and work, do whatever you want to do, then you'll get an A in the course." And this is something that was coming out of him from inside.
Steve graduated from high school here in Lexington, went to UK.
Took a break at some point from college and went into the Air Force myself, and then came back under the GI Bill and went back to school.
So from that point, he tried to figure out what it is that he truly wanted to do. And I think he found a passion within himself to be a teacher.
Went to Atlanta and took the Montessori teacher's training, and had about an 18-year career as a Montessori teacher, and I wound up owning my own school.
He had a Montessori school. He taught children from the age of 3 through 6 for many, many years, and he loved it. But you can also see that in his work. He loves to do artwork that would make a 4-year-old laugh, and I think it does.
At some point I thought, I've still got this desire to make art, and I'm going to let my life slip away without doing that if I don't do something about it now. I developed what I called my 3-year plan and tried to educate myself as much as I could about what I wanted to do when I gave up teaching. I took classes, perfected some skills, and prepared for that time when I wouldn't have that income.
I guess we first became aware of Steve's prowess as an artist when the sketches came home from Montessori school. Very often he would draw our daughter in the superhero position and himself being saved, which would then be very empowering.
We always think about the dog chasing the cat, but then the cat realizes that the cat has power in the world. So the cat turns around, starts chasing the dog, and the dog becomes frightened. Is that our commentary on the power of people? And one small voice, even though it's only a whisper, can be heard.
Steve's, as I've come to know him, he's a nurturer, and that probably speaks back to his early training with children.
As he was interacting with his students, he did it in a very creative way. He would elaborate lessons with pictures that he would draw, with games, with little sketches that were very, very well done and very artistic. And I see that as a carryover into his development as an artist.
I remember as a child myself, you kind of enjoy a little bit being scared, so there's this kind of dark, macabre humor a lot of times to my pieces.
I would say Steve's work is edgier. He does have there's always an element of death and how death invades life or is behind the shadow somewhere.
He was born on Halloween. And part of this dark side is not something that emerged later in life. It's been part of a dark humor that's been part of him since I've ever known him.
I think the wonderful thing about his pieces is that even though it really is this physical representation of a metaphorical struggle, you almost get the feeling that maybe this time the person who's doing that back and forth struggle can win, even though you know, of course, it can't.
One of the reasons that I went to Folk Fest in Atlanta was to broaden the audience for Steve's work. And that proved to be extremely successful.
There was a booth with Steve's work, and they were very highly detailed, fine art pieces. And Steve was saying, come on up and play with them. Don't hesitate to touch the artwork. It's meant to be touched.
It was very clearly folk art going into fine art, one going into the other.
Some are very, very whimsical, some are very basic, some are more complex. Each one has to be dealt with on its own merits.
When you get up close to his pieces and start actually looking how the gears work and what it turns and the thought process of how to make this piece swivel a certain way, it's incredibly fascinating just from sort of a structural standpoint. And then from a playful standpoint, obviously it's fun to make the gears turn.
Once things are moving, you interpret and you're viewing it from different angles, you're watching action, reaction. It's very much a participatory act.
He has set up a visual language. He's constantly reading, constantly studying, constantly in search of knowledge and insight.
Content-wise, he does such a range of work. So he will approach a serious subject with a playful attitude.
When you go into a museum, everything's behind some sort of barrier. There are light sensors, don't touch, don't get too close. And that's not the way most of that material was generated. It was generated for possibly wear or interaction or a more sensual experience. Steve has had real reservations about art that's been enshrined, and for no one to really experience his work goes completely the other way.
With Steve's work, it doesn't really fully come to life until there is the energy transfer between the visitor and the piece itself. This is an unusual situation, and obviously we have to sort of step aside for a moment from the traditional rules of museum exhibitions to showcase his work.
I think with Steve's art, when people come into the gallery, at first they're a little hesitant, they see the gear, but then you encourage them to go ahead and turn it, and it's like everybody smiles when they see the things start moving, because it does bring back a little childhood notion of play. They're standing back looking at it going, this is something very unusual.
People come to his art shows for the first time and they walk around in absolute amazement at what they see. They're not at a place where they can't touch the art, they're at a place where they are absolutely invited, if not shoved, into touching the art.
I get a lot of enjoyment at one of my art shows being a fly on the wall and watching people interact. I try to incorporate a sense of mystery, a sense of wonder, so that the viewer gets to go up and interact with the piece and kind of discover its secret.
There's a childlike optimism in him sometimes, which maybe when you first look at his work you might not see, but it's there.
I challenge anyone to see some of his work and not find yourself sort of instinctively wanting to reach forward to pull that lever or turn that crank. And that's one of the interesting facets of his work, is that it makes you participate.
They look beautiful as a standalone object, but they're even more wonderful when you get to go over and wind them and become part of the process and play with them. In that sense, I think the viewer can be one with the art object.
I painted everything black first, and I'm going to let some of that black show through, hopefully. It kind of mutes the color so that it's not too intense. It gives me a little more control over it. Also mask off a little area here at the end of the shaft where the gear attaches. It's better to have bare wood glued to bare wood. Well, I've mixed up the color I want. I've got it kind of thin, and I'm just going to soup it on. We're going to continue slopping the paint on.